Hello folks, welcome back. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. In the past number of days since President Trump's executive order regarding South Africa on the 7th of February 2025, the Solidarity Movement and its subsidiary AfriForum have come in for rounds of criticism by many Afrikaners in South Africa after media reports misquoted, misstated, and flat out lied about their position regarding the offer for refugee status for Afrikaners. In fact, AfriForum and Solidarity in their press conference made no such claim that no Afrikaners would leave and they didn't support it. That's simply factually untrue. Despite that, many of my viewers still believe that that's the case because you're reading News 24, ENCA, IOL. I don't know what you're reading. Simply not the case. This video is not in support or not in attack of AfriForum or Solidarity, simply stating the facts once again. So AfriForum and Solidarity have representatives currently in the United States visiting with officials in Washington, D.C. as part of a delegation trying to get a point across to decision makers here. Now, the delegation for AfriForum and Solidarity and the Solidarity Movement have met with senior representatives of the Trump administration at the White House here in Washington, D.C. The Solidarity Movement's delegation was led by chairperson of the Solidarity Movement, Flip Bice, and included Kali Creel, AfriForum CEO, Dr. Dirk Herman, Solidarity CEO, and Jaco Kleinhans, the head of international liaison at the Solidarity Movement. They handed over a memorandum to the Trump administration. It's a 5-page memorandum. During the meeting, the memorandum indicates that the interest of South Africa's citizens, including Afrikaners, can best be promoted through intensified pressure on ANC leaders for pushing for radical policies rather than ending South Africa's participation in the African Growth and Opportunity Act or punishing the country as a whole. I'm going to read excerpts from this and some of the recommendations or things they've asked of the Trump administration. So let's get started with this very quickly just to update you on this. As I said, this information came out in the last half hour. So a number of points here. You can read the whole 5-page memorandum yourself. The link will be below the video, but I want to highlight a few things. Between the 1st and 9th of February 2025, a series of statements and concrete steps by the Trump administration in the United States shed light on the enormous diplomatic crisis between South Africa and the United States. This came after years of hostile foreign policy by South Africa towards the U.S., which I've highlighted on numerous occasions in multiple videos explaining to you all the things that have been antithesis of the United States' national security interests and our domestic interests, actions taken by the ANC, like their cozy, chummy relationship with Tehran, Beijing, Moscow, the Lady R incident, the training of Chinese People's Liberation Army combat pilots in South Africa, and the list goes on and on. President Trump, with good reason, signed an executive order on the 7th of February that sent shockwaves through South Africa. He rightly spoke out strongly against South Africa's domestic and foreign policies that seriously harm minorities in South Africa, but also threaten America's national security interests. This is, in fact, the case, and it's high time that someone in the U.S. policy establishment actually address this issue. Trump is doing that. Members of Congress in a bipartisan fashion attempted to do so on the 6th of February 2024 during the Biden administration, but it went nowhere. Now, Solidarity says it's by far the largest Afrikaner movement in South Africa and has more than 600,000 members. And if you include their entire network and the members who are families, they represent about 2 million South Africans through a civil network of organizations. Since President Trump's announcement, a stormy debate has been raging in South Africa, and the Solidarity Movement has been placed at the center of this debate, whether they wanted to or not. The ANC placed the blame for the executive order squarely at the door of Solidarity Movement. They have denied their own role in weakening of diplomatic relations. Charges of treason were even laid against AfriForum, which were supported by the African National Congress. Now, that's all true, folks. The behavior of South Africa's political officials has been absolutely reprehensible, blaming Solidarity. Solidarity, as you'll find out here in just a moment, has been lobbying here in the United States for over 2 decades, and this executive order is not a consequence of action by Solidarity, not even remotely. As I mentioned, Democrats and Republicans have been angry about South Africa's position regarding U.S. national interests for some time, and it's been coming to the boil. South African government continued to deny the reality of their own actions and policies that led to crises and decided to prove President Trump wrong, arrogantly refusing to negotiate. We saw this with Ramaphosa at the State of the Nation address saying, "We will not be bullied." Nobody's bullying you. We've simply ended aid. That's our money, not yours. And we've offered refugee status to people from South Africa who feel oppressed. That's, again, our internal affair, not South Africa. President Trump offered no threats. He made no preconditions. He offered no effort to resume aid, simply a statement of fact. He did say the relationship would be investigated further. Well, maybe that's what frightens the ANC. President Ramaphosa decided to assemble a delegation that will travel to the USA to argue that the Trump administration's arguments about South Africa are unfounded and wrong, and to affirm that South Africa will not allow the USA to bully the country. The USA is not bullying South Africa, and Trump's assumptions are not assumptions, they're facts. The Solidarity Movement was not invited to be part of the government delegation, but they also made it clear to the ANC that they would not be part of such a delegation if the delegation's mandate were merely comprised of the above. Therefore, the Solidarity Movement has decided to send a delegation to the USA in the interest of its members, the Afrikaners specifically, but also in the interest of South Africa and all South Africans in general. Now, their stance on U.S. relations in South Africa. They've been involved in political engagement in the United States for 21 years. In recent years, they've noticed a deterioration in relations between South Africa and the United States, a diplomatic rift. First and foremost, we are deeply grateful to President Trump for pointing out serious flaws in South Africa's domestic and foreign policies. We're also grateful for the hand of friendship he has extended to the Afrikaners. We also welcome the U.S. government's concern about certain aspects of the South African government's domestic policy, such as 117 racial laws promulgated by the ANC, the Expropriation Act, the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act, BELA, that seeks to destroy Afrikaans schools, lack of action against scapegoating and calls for violence against Afrikaners, and the treatment of Afrikaners as second-class citizens based on our ancestry, culture, and race. Now, they have an outreach here, and they talk about 10 different positions in which Solidarity and AfriForum are going to address officials, including recognition of the generous offer of humanitarian assistance to Afrikaners. They mention South Africa's foreign policy. The Solidarity Movement shares the Trump administration's concerns about the South African government's foreign policy, especially with regard to Israel, China, Iran, Russia, Rwanda, and Taiwan. That's another one I've pointed out, Taiwan, the abusive treatment that the Taiwan delegation has received. And they make recommendations to the U.S. policymakers. I won't read all of them. I'll read the key ones. In light of the above, we recommend that the pressure on South Africa be sustained, but the focus be on pressuring the ANC leaders who are responsible for the policies, vice on the people of South Africa. Talk about Afrikaners in South Africa. They say traditionally Afrikaners are a farming community, and almost 75% of South Africa's commercial farmers are Afrikaners. The brutal farm murders in South Africa hit this community hard. Farm murders are particularly brutal, and their frequency compared to murders in the rest of the country is very high. This community is therefore particularly exposed to a government that expropriates without compensation, while also being exposed to land grabs and land occupations, as well as calls for violence against them that are made publicly without any repercussions for those spreading hate against Afrikaners. Indeed, the South African Human Rights Commission allows black politicians to call for the murder of white South Africans without any concern whatsoever. The possibility, and this is where a lot of my viewers will take exception. No need to take exception. Listen to what AfriForum and Solidarity are saying, not what the media are telling you, or not what you choose to believe. The possibility of resettlement through the United States Refugee Admissions Program and possible humanitarian aid are being considered, and we have an appreciation for the Trump administration's inclusion of these matters in the executive order. Although individuals may qualify for a resettlement program and make use of this generous offer, the majority of Afrikaners will still remain in South Africa. Now, they're not telling the majority of Afrikaners to remain in South Africa. They're not encouraging, they're not discouraging. They're simply stating what is likely a fact. Most Afrikaners will not leave South Africa. Do not attack Solidarity or AfriForum for stating the obvious. If you disagree with it, that's fine. If you would like to take the president up on his refugee offer when the program is finally announced, then more power to you. But do not pollute the environment or the conversation by falsely attributing things to these folks that they never said. That's what the left-stream media does. Let them do that. In light of that, they have a few recommendations. That aid be provided to an Afrikaner development fund to assist with community infrastructure protecting Afrikaners. This includes safety structures, social structures, job structures, training structures, and infrastructure to settle Afrikaners in a concentrated manner. That is interesting. That is interesting, especially after AfriForum is focused so much on self-bestuur, self-reliance. They're looking for aid to help the Afrikaner community. That's a new one. Interesting. Pressure be put on South Africa to declare farm murders a priority crime and take decisive action against those calling for violence against Afrikaners. That's only reasonable. It is a serious concern. Pressure also be put on the South African government to revise the BELA Act, the Expropriation Act, and legislation that discriminates on the basis of race. And they turn to expropriation. Here they say they recommended that pressure be put on the government to pass an amendment act removing the zero compensation clause. And then on BELA, they recommend the American government must put pressure on the South African government to repeal those provisions in the BELA Act that remove schools' rights to determine their own language and admissions policies. And while I'm not part of this, I would suggest they also should include a repeal of the prison threat to parents whose children are truant. That will affect black South Africans the most, who can't afford to get their kids to school if they're poor. On racial laws, they recommend that pressure be put on the South African government to indicate before the G20 summit to be held in Johannesburg in November this year how racial legislation would be phased out. And finally, in summary at the end, the Solidarity Movement is extremely grateful for South Africa's participation in the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. And they say that trade with the U.S. provides jobs for approximately 576,000 South Africans. That's a significant portion of the employed sector. Of them, approximately 250,000 are directly or indirectly linked to AGOA. And exports to the U.S. constitute approximately 3.4% of South Africa's gross domestic product. These are all figures that the ANC puts the country's economy at risk in a period of virtually no growth or contraction. Stupidity of the government to upset and intentionally offend the United States with its positions on Israel, Taiwan, and a host of other issues. That's my commentary, not AfriForum's. The paradox of South Africa's non-participation in AGOA is that America's allies in South Africa, its friends, and the group President Trump has identified as vulnerable will be hit the hardest. Indeed, that's probably a true statement. Therefore, they recommend that South Africa continues to be included in AGOA, which is something that the ANC has falsely claimed that AfriForum and Solidarity have tried to stop. They have never tried to stop AGOA. It's benefited their members and other South Africans in general. So they've never done that, and they're clearly asking for President Trump not to exclude South Africa from AGOA. As an alternative to excluding South Africa, punitive measures rather be directed at senior ANC leaders, corrupt individuals, and those siding with international terrorist organizations. And their final statement here in this letter, 5-page letter, memorandum they've given to the Trump administration is, the Solidarity Movement disagrees with the ANC but loves our country. Our visit to the U.S. is to find a positive outcome for our country. This does indeed require putting pressure on the ANC, as their international and national policies are to the great detriment of our beautiful country and its people. And there you have it, folks. That's what AfriForum actually said. That is not what the media have told you. Let's see how this is reported in mainstream media in South Africa. I'm reporting the facts to you. You can assess and analyze any way you like, but that's the information. That's what Solidarity and AfriForum are doing in the United States, making office calls with a number of political officials. And you see here that they visited the White House today, the 25th of February, 2025. Well, what say you, folks? Do you have an open mind here, or are you going to believe the press who tell you one thing when AfriForum actually does something else? It's your position. Your opinion matters. Cheers.